she said she had lots of money and no kids, and would be, really happy to sponsor me and help me along with my career.
Yeah. Is professional ice skating a lucrative career? Is it worth all the time and the effort and so on?
I think so. I really think so.
Yeah.
If you're in my position, it is.
Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. I want to thank you for taking time out to join us once again. Today we'll be talking about professional ice skating. This past week, the Halifax Metro Centre has been the scene for the 1983 version of Ice Capades. If you haven't had a chance to take in the show, there's one more matinee this afternoon, March 9th at 6 p.m. Reflecting years of amateur and professional polish, the performers in this year's production were selected from among the world's greatest skaters. Heading this year's show was U.S. Junior Men's Champion Richard Ewell. Richard was the first black to participate in international competition and is one of the few blacks to perform professionally. In today's program, we'll talk to Richard about his career and life as a professional ice skater. Richard, welcome to Halifax and welcome to the Black Horizons program.
Thank you.
You've been quoted as saying that you were a late starter and that you began skating at the ripe old age of 13. I was kind of surprised when I read that. What did you mean with a late starter? Is there an ideal age for starting ice skating?
Yeah, I think so. I think a skater, if they really want to develop, to world or Olympic or national status, really should start earlier with their training, just being familiar with the ice. And I feel like 7, 8, or 9 years old is a better age to start a skater. Mm-hmm. Just for the development and the discipline that's involved with it. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate.
Right. I think you said sometime that even though you started late, that you felt that this has had an influence on some of the other skaters. What did you mean by that?
Well, because I did start late, I didn't want anybody to think that it's not possible to get as far as you possibly can starting late. If you didn't start younger, I often meet people that are maybe 11 or 12 or even 13 that think, well, it's too late for me to get into it. And I said, well, look at me. I started at 13 and I got this far. I won 2 national titles in the U.S. I competed internationally and been with Ice Capades the last 11 seasons as a late starter. But I just was fortunate enough to have an intense love for the sport and what I was doing and cared enough to really stick with it and just push myself.
Right. Well, I'd like to take you back to, if I can, to your thoughts when you were considering a career as a skater. What made you decide to go into skating?
I don't know. It's funny. I just got serious early, but it was a very slow process. I had always enjoyed watching it, and my parents used to take my sister and I to Ice Capades when it came to Los Angeles when we were like 5, 6, and 7 years old, and I'd rush home, put the roller skates on, and go all up and down the block imitating the comedians and everybody I saw. And that's why it was so surprising at 13 years, when I got to 13, that's when I finally started skating. But on Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles, my mom and dad were good about taking my sister and I out on the weekends to the beach or museums or to see different things and to experience what was out in the world, not to be kind of closed into the neighborhood. Yeah. And like an easy atmosphere. My mom wanted us to know what was going on around us, sort of educate us constantly outside of the school. Right. And they were both from Kansas City, Missouri, where they'd always seen snow and ice, but they had never skated. Yes. And they had, at that time, got so tired of listening to my sister and I, in March, complaining about it being so cold to go to school. Yes. Well, they figured they have a double thing here. They can get us out for recreation and have us ice skate, and then let us really feel what cold was being like. Yes. So we wouldn't complain in the morning, you know.
You were complaining of the cold in Los Angeles.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, it's like 50 degrees, and you would think a blizzard was coming through the way we'd bundle up. You know? But that's just that, the environment. Right. And we all went to an ice rink, a local ice rink, and started skating. And I just fell in love with it. The whole family got on the ice. I was all over the place, all over the rail. And I had a great fortune of meeting a lady, Mabel Fairbanks. She was a black coach at the rink at the time. And my mom saw her standing off to the side, getting all this money pushed in her face by all these parents, and figured, well, she must be an instructor. So she asked would she give the family like a little starting lesson in skating, because it was our first time. So she got us all together off the rails as a group and slowly started teaching us, the basics of skating just to get us going on this public session. And it was fun. After that, I was like all over the place. Middle of the ice falling, getting up, falling. But I got out to the center finally. And the next weekend I asked, my sister and I said, can we go back? And so it got to be an every weekend thing. Every, Saturday or Sunday we'd go out to the rink. That lasted for about 2 months and the place burned down. And so for about 3 weeks we didn't do anything. And then my sister and I kept bugging my mom about skating again. And there was a rink that was closer to where we lived. And we went there, and Mabel had moved from the rink in Hollywood, where she was teaching when we met her. Because we got completely cut off, to this one close to us. We didn't know it. And I went right back to training with her.
So from that time on, did you decide that you wanted to become a professional skater, or did that come later?
That came a lot later, almost like a surprise to me. It's always in the back of an amateur skater's mind when they're winning titles or competing or really enjoy skating at all and when they continue to do it. But no, not at first. I was just very, very intrigued with competition. When I was younger in Los Angeles, I'd always been too small or too short or too shy to really excel at other sports. Like when I'd play school baseball, and we're all, everybody's up at bat and we're out there fighting to win this game. And then they'd see me coming. If there was 2 outs, forget it. Like the guys, we have to put Richard up to bat, and they'd all put their gloves on and stand up ready to go out in the field, depressed, we're behind and Richard's up at bat, And so I kind of lived through that. And even if they always put me in the most remote part of outfield where they expected nobody would hit the ball, so they wouldn't have to depend on me. And if there was another team where they were picking up sides with your neighborhood friends, I was always the last one to be picked. It was like, well, okay, you have Richard, And so I kind of was reluctant to do sports a lot. But then in skating, it didn't involve team. It didn't involve peer pressure. It was almost all to myself. If I did well, great. If I didn't, then there wasn't anybody browbeating me about whether I did well or not, or you blew it for us, Richard. And I think that kind of helped me excel in competitive skating, because I was all depending on myself.
Right. Well, now, there's a lot of extensive training that goes into competitive or professional skating. I wonder if perhaps you could give us some insights as to just what's involved. What kind of rigors does one have to go through to excel in competitive skating? What's involved?
Okay, once I got into it, it started involving, when I was getting near a national level of competing, a schedule of 6 days a week, 7 hours each day. And that was getting up in the morning before school, doing 3, coming back after school, doing 4 more hours, and trying to get in either Saturday or Sunday, another 6 hours, and then maybe 2. It was actually 7 days a week, but they was pretty rigid that at least 6 of those days I was doing 6 or 7 hours. So it was almost like more of a business once I got into competitive skating. And plus I also did pairs and singles, which during the summer constituted a day of from 7 to 8 hours. Putting in the figures, passing the test, because each country has a test that you have to take to get to your gold, which is the last test that you pass to be eligible to compete in a world and Olympic competition. And you also have to realize you're not the only one in the world doing this, or in the country, or in your region. So it entails a lot: the lessons, the equipment, the time, the travel. There's a lot involved.
It must be a very costly process as well. You're talking for 6 or 7 hours. Who would pay for the ice time and so on? Would you have to pay for that kind of?
Yeah, each individual has to pay for it. There are different funds that help skaters that are coming along that are promising. In Canada here, they have the bursary fund. In the U.S., we have the memorial fund. And that's money that's donated and put in by like the different skating clubs and private people or businesses. They help promote the skating in these countries and help them come along, the Olympic Committee. And but it's very involved. You're talking anything from $600, $7 a month for a skater's training, as far as ice time and equipment. And even with ice time and equipment, the $600 or $700 doesn't really entail all the lessons. It used to be that when I was coming along, it was just all ice training. where now it's even more involved, where you have to take dance lessons. We took a little bit of dance when I was coming along, but now there's dance and acrobatics and music appreciation. There's just so much involved in it. And the lessons go from anything from $24 an hour to up to $36 an hour, depending on the professional you're taking from or your coach. The traveling expenses, what you've competed and made it out of one region to the next, and then making it to the national championships and all that time and travel involved, because you're not only you, and sometimes you bring your family, but your coach, you want him to come along too. And to me, I know it was very fortunate. The coaches I took from, he had at least 10, 11, 12 competitors that we all shared the expense of getting them there. Some skaters don't have that. They have maybe one or two students with one coach, and they have to pay for all that expense. And so I think there'd be like an average, starting out when you're getting pretty successful in skating, $6,000, $7,000, to when you're making world and Olympic level competition of $12,000 to $15,000 annually.
So it's certainly not a poor man's sport.
Not really.
You require an awful lot of discipline too, I guess, because all those hours, it wouldn't leave much time for a social life, I guess. You'd really have to want to be a skater pretty bad, I guess.
That's true. I had none that I can think of when I was younger.
Yeah.
I only dated my pair partner, and that was like very remotely, because I spent all my time on the ice. It really wasn't until after high school I did some work to get a little extra money, do things. But I really didn't have any free time, honestly, until I joined Ice Capades.
Right.
And then I wasn't doing all these hours a day, and I was able to stop for a minute and look, what everybody else was doing. At that time, I was 22.
Yeah.
So a lot had gone by.
Well, is there a fixed number of years that it would take to develop the expertise to become a world caliber skater? It's something that you could put 6 or 7 years into, and if you've got the ability, you should be there, or how does it go?
No, it varies, because every individual is different. Some skaters excel a lot faster, some are slower, and they all come up to the same. They'll all maybe get to that point of high enough caliber to be a national champion, world champion, or at least a medalist in contention. But it varies for every skater. There's some that have won world titles at real young ages, some that were a lot older when they won their world title, some that have won it at maybe 18, 19. And then others that finally don't reach that goal till they're 25, 26. So it varies for each individual, depending on sometimes just the time they're competing and who's coming up, who's coming along in the training.
Yeah. Is it a sport where you make more or less continuous progress? You're always learning something new, or do you more or less reach a peak and from there it's like you become a journeyman? It's pretty much it becomes old hat, or are you always learning something new?
I think to be successful, that you always should be learning something new. I don't think anybody that I've known that is a very good artist in it, or a very good sportsman, or an amateur skater winning those world titles, if they have reached a plateau where they can't learn anymore, to me, I think, why continue in it? If you're an amateur, you don't feel like you can go any further, get out. Because if you can't push yourself to go that much more further off that plateau onto the next, you're taking that chance of somebody else coming along that's going to be able to push themselves and beat you out. Which, that's not a lot of fun, losing.
No.
Especially if you're at the top and want to stay there.
Right.
So it's always pushing, always coming up with something new, always learning something more. I mean, the views is like a living education in the sport. That there's always something else to learn. There's always something coming along. I even learned that in the show. I've been in the show 11 seasons, but every year it's always taken me on to something new. I never felt after the first 2 or 3 years that I knew everything there was about performing in ice shows and in the business and skating and Ice Capades. It was not like that. Every year I've learned some new aspect, even something new about myself in performing in the show. And when I don't feel like I'm learning anymore, then I think I'll get out of it.
Right. Well, now, there are not many blacks who are into professional or competitive ice skating. When I read your bio, it's filled with a number of firsts. You were the first black to win the junior men's and junior pairs title in the United States, the first black to compete internationally, the first black principal in Ice Capades, and so on. Did this fact add any undue pressure to you as you were developing as a competitive and professional skater? The fact that you were one of the few, just maybe one of maybe 2 or 3 blacks in the whole sport?
I was always aware of it. But because what was ahead of me, the competition and winning those titles, I couldn't dwell on it. I could not afford myself to put that kind of pressure on myself. Because then if you've heard the expression choke. I feel that I might have would have just choked up because I felt I would have let everybody down, every black that walks the earth, because I didn't win this. And it wasn't fair to myself and my ability to develop. You know, I was really proud after I had accomplished it, you know, for the reasons. Being the first black was fantastic. But, you know, I was still trying to be a skater, just developed Richard for as far as Richard could go. And winning these and becoming these first were fantastic. You know, but to me, they were, because there'll always be somebody else to come along and have more first. You know, there was a gentleman before me, Atoy Wilson, who was actually the first black skater in our country, the U.S., to win a national title, won the U.S. Novice Men in '66. Well, I looked up to him, you know. God, you know, this kid, and even to the point that at the time when I was coming along, I was right behind him. I even beat him in a couple of competitions, you know, as I was coming along. But he had first, and I had first, and there's been skaters after me that have had first, you know, so.
So you were able to, that's part of being a professional, I guess, being able to put that behind you and just concentrate on your general goal, which is to become the best skater that you can, I guess, eh?
Yeah, really, you know, and just keep that learning value.
Right. Well, now, how many years were you skating before you got to, you say you started at 13. How many years was it before you got into international competition?
7. Yeah, because I started in 63. And was in Europe in 70, so I guess 7 years.
Right. How extensive was your international competitions?
One.
How did you do?
It was pretty, well, it was more interesting. I was 4th overall. I had won a silver medal in the men's free skating over in Europe. And it was quite a rough group. You know, at the time I didn't realize, because the gentleman that actually won the competition wound up 6 years later being the Olympic champion, John Curry from England. And I also skated against one of the Canadian champions that wound up later being the Canadian champion, Ron Shaver. So I had like a really rough group of guys to skate in, you know. But it was fun because I had always been around a group of skaters in Los Angeles with my coach that were used to going to Olympics and World, and they forever heard story about these international competitions and was just dying to wonder how it would feel like. Well, in '70, when I won the U.S. Junior Men's Championship, the United States asked me to be representative for them that summer in August over in France at the Saint Gervais Championships. And I couldn't believe it. I kind of stood around in awe. It reminded me of my first U.S. championship, which I made in '69. It was like I had finally qualified for the U.S. Championships, and I was there in junior men. And I don't even know if I trained. All I remember is just being there. And then the moment I skated, the free skating, but everything else, I just stood in awe. Because I'd watched it on TV and now I was there. And this competition kind of struck me the same way. I did fairly well against the guys, but
must have been a high point of your.
Oh, it was. I wished I could have gone further.
Was it immediately after that you began your professional career with the Ice Capades?
No, I competed 2 more years because I was also doing pairs, and I went back because I had just slipped out of juniors into seniors, and so there was still the chance of making the Olympics in '72 if I worked hard, or if I wanted to continue on to '76 or the World Championships in between those times. So when I came back from France, the next goal was to get my last test and do well in the senior men's event, plus pulling along the pairs, because I was competing in pairs also. So I went right back from there knowing that, hey, I like this. I want to do this again. I want to go to Europe. I want to go here and compete. And it was coming back and really realizing what I had ahead of me, you know, and what I had to do to get back to that kind of experience, being at another international championship.
Right. What made you decide to turn from competitive skating to professional skating?
A lot. Money was sort of an idea, because if I continued amateur skating, I would have had to find more money for the level I'd gotten to in the seniors in the men's event that I started competing in. Plus, I had the fortune of winning the U.S. Junior Pairs Championship, so that was behind me too. I needed more money to compete in senior pairs also, in the 2 events, which it almost would double the expense of what I had then, as far as competing and be able to stay in it. And I would have had to probably find another sponsor, more lucrative sponsor too, to stay in it. Then maybe I would have had to take a choice between skating just pairs or skating just singles. My coach advised me I should just do singles, because he felt I was more promising in just singles. Then the offer came from Ice Capades. They'd watched me compete for years and knew what, you know, the ability I had, and were interested in me being in the show. which was fantastic, I thought, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to turn pro then. And it was something you weren't sure it was always going to be there in the future. Sure, I could go on and maybe compete. The competition's always there's still always going to be a World Olympic Championships, and do I want to compete in that, or do I want to take this opportunity to join Ice Capades? Because they may want me now, but maybe they might want me in 1 or 2 years. Somebody else will come along, or the spot will be filled.
Right.
And it was pretty much almost that kind of a decision, because it was a choice between me and my partner and another couple on the East Coast at the time they weren't sure about. And but they really wanted us because we were the reigning pair champions in juniors, and I was the junior men's champion for the U.S. And it sounded good. I mean, we had been putting out money for years, and the idea of money coming back sounded
kind of appealed to you.
It did,
right.
From zero to X amount of dollars. I mean, hey, that
sounds
all
right.
A good deal.
Right.
My parents had lived years with. Every time we came back into my neighborhood, and sometimes people don't understand amateur skating.
Yes.
And the winning of world titles, Olympic titles, they think that's great. But in my neighborhood that wasn't that briefed or educated in skating, when I won the U.S. Junior Men's Championship, and my dad was proud and my parents were proud, and they'd throw their chest out talking about, my son won the U.S. Junior Men's, and their friends would go, great, well, how much money did he get?
Yeah.
Well, see, that wasn't it. You just got a trophy and a medal.
Yeah.
And it cost you a fortune.
Yeah.
So now I joined Ice Capades, and it was like they were able to say, well, yeah, he's making all this money now. He's going to get money coming back.
Right.
So it kind of made them happy with my decision.
Right. Well, now help us understand a little bit about what life as a professional skater is like. What is it like being part of a show like the Ice Capades? What kind of impact does it have on family life, the life on the road, that kind of thing? What is it like being a professional skater?
Well, I went through 2 years of being very homesick.
Yeah.
Because I had never been out of the Los Angeles area more than a week or two competing. So now here I was torn away from home and everything I was familiar with and comfortable with to be on the road for a year. And at first it was kind of hard because things would come up on tour, things I was worried about. I had heard rumors about places I'd go, and so being black, I was a little nervous about going there and had a lot of anxiety at times. And then also wondering if I'm performing up to par and learning the ropes of professional skating. And so it made it a little rough in the beginning, because it was just all so new and I wasn't sure what I had to deal with.
Were any of your fears realized in that respect? Have you ever been hassled or anything in Ice Capades because you were black in any of the towns?
Not in the show.
Yes.
Outside the show on the streets, just as another black, because they don't know, it's me.
Right.
But not really in the show. Things were always said, and there's been kidding, but it's definitely kidding. Never anything that, that was out to hurt me. If anything, they were just trying to say you're family, and we kid with family, we're kidding with you, Richard.
Right.
Which I had to learn, to understand.
Right.
It did bother me a little at first, but then I understood, because then I'd come back at them, Right. But
is it as rigorous being a professional skater as it is when you're in competitive skating?
Yeah. Now this is something. Now where I said it is, like as a principal skater in the show, because a lot of times we think, well, now you're gonna have to do the 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and it's going to be a lot easier in the show. You're more relaxed. You're just free skating. You don't have to worry about doing the school figures and all that. And it actually gets even harder. Because instead of training the 6 or 7 hours a day to compete, maybe 4 or 5 times out of a whole year, now I'm thrust in front of an audience, expected to do just about everything I did as an amateur, but 9 shows a week, 3 times on Saturday, twice on Sunday. So there was not the competitive pressure, but then I was thrown into a whole new set of pressures, having to get myself up for all these performances each week in every town on different ice surfaces, different size, for different conditions. Whereas an amateur, God, it would have been like life or death to me. I said, I can't skate on that ice. It's impossible. Where now, the ice will be wet or be too hard or chippy, and I don't like it, but I still have to go out there and perform. And still, I expect myself to do as well if the ice was in perfect shape.
Well, there must be quite a bit of competitive competition as well. I suppose there's quite a few skaters out there who'd like to have your job.
Probably. It kind of keeps me on my toes. It keeps me working because I enjoy what I'm doing. And knowing that, I've been in the show for 11 seasons and see just a mountain of talent come in and then leave, which keeps me worried. That's pressure for me. We have a skater in the show now, Robert Wagenhofer, that is just fantastic. Kid does a backflip, triples. He was, last season, he wasn't professional, he was an amateur, but probably one of the best skaters in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and then here he is skating side by side with me in the show. You know, well, I get a little nervous. I've been here for 11 years. I'm getting old, you know.
Kind of keeps you on your toes.
You know, so it keeps me on my toes, keeps me working.
Well, now, is there a career span for a professional skater? Is it something that depends on individuals? Normally, when we think of other sports, when you reach 35, you think of most people are, if it's basketball or whatever, usually they're thinking about retirement. What's the career span for a skater, a professional skater?
It varies. It really varies to the individual and what you're doing. Like the comedians, we have comedians in the show that have been doing the business for like 20, 30, 35 years.
Is that right?
You know, where usually people in my aspect of the show, I think a good career for them is maybe at the most 4 or 5 years.
Is that right?
And I've gone 11.
Yeah. Well,
And there was one soloist before me, Japanese star they had in the show, that his last season, he had 19 seasons in the show before he retired.
Yeah. Well, now, how many years more do you hope to skate, and what do you want to do when you finish off your career?
I don't know. I think I would like to skate maybe 2 more seasons, and then probably get into coaching, or maybe move off to another aspect of still performing, and I would like to do ice performing, but maybe on a smaller scale, or maybe in just one place. Like they have like showrooms and stuff in Las Vegas or Atlantic City, and maybe just try that, see how I would do in that kind of an atmosphere of performing. You know, I love this because there's so many people, and especially Ice Capades, because for our show it's true family entertainment, and I love performing for the families because I love reaching out to the tiniest little kid with my skating and making it exciting for the child, to the adults or the parents that are there, and making it really thrilling and exciting to them. If I could touch all those people, I feel great. I feel like I've done my job, and that's what I'm stepping on the ice to do.
Right. Well, now, you remind me somewhat of Arthur Ashe. When Arthur started playing tennis, he was one of the few blacks in the field of tennis. Of course, today we have quite a few that are there. Do you think that the Arthur Ashe effect is going to happen with skating? Do you think that you've perhaps been inspiration for some black kids to take up the sport?
I certainly hope so. I have talked to different black skaters that I've met over the years that say that because of me, they sort of got into the sport. You know, they were in skating and maybe thought, well, there's no blacks in skating, because they rarely see it depending on the regions and the money and everything. And then they'll come to the show and see me jumping around and say, well, where'd he come from? Where's he been? And God, he can really skate.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of it is if they've started even without knowing me, but see me later, I'm an inspiration, hopefully, for them to continue, to go on.
Right.
You know, there is another avenue. If they're not being successful amateur skating, well, look, Richard's in the show and he's doing real well. He's one of the stars.
Yeah.
So maybe I can do that. You know, there's always that.
Well, now, to those potential skaters out there who may be seeing today's program, if you were going to give them some advice, what advice would you give to them?
The advice is, I think, is if they really want to do it, like I did, I think you have to learn to be sacrifices. There's going to be setbacks. You know, you're not going to win every competition. Maybe you'd have to put up with a 4th and a 5th, or even a last place like I did, for that possibility of winning maybe 1 or 2 times. But like me, if you love it, you'll just stick with it. You'll put your heart in it. You'll devote yourself to it.
So you got to be determined and have perseverance.
You got to be determined. Got to have perseverance. But I think if on top of it, you learn to love it, all the rest of it comes so easy.
Right.
And hopefully, I think God was with me all the way too.
Yeah, that's important. Well, Richard, we want to thank you for being our guest. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. All the things have to come to an end. So those of you who are watching the program, as I said at the top, if you haven't caught this year's edition of the 1983 Ice Capades, there's one more show this afternoon at 6 o'clock. You should check this young fellow out. Thank you for watching. See you next week. Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. Today we have a tribute to El-Hajj Malik El Shabazz, or Malcom X. Approximately 18 years ago, on February 21st, 1965, El-Hajj Malik El Shabazz, or Malcom X as he was more universally known, was shot dead while delivering a speech at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York. Were local and federal police officials involved in the assassination of Malcom X? Well, 20 years later, the question still remains unanswered. Viewed by many as one of the most remarkable figures in the 1960s civil rights movement, Malcom, at the age of 39, was still in the process of reaching his full height, still in the process of working out his program, and still in the process of building a new movement. In the first part of today's program, in memory of Malcom, we will view old film clips of interviews and speeches made by Malcom in his attempts at black mobilization in Africa and America. In the second part of our program, we will talk to D.W. Buddy Daye, a council member of Buff, a member of numerous community associations, and a longtime community activist, about Malcom's views on organizing the black community, on making alliances, and on questions of separatism and black nationalism. First, a look at the film clips.
We will smile. Malcom was our manhood, our living manhood. This was his meaning to his people, and in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. His widow, Mrs. Buddy Shabazz, tells of his childhood.
Well, his early life, his family was disrupted. His father was killed when he was 6, and his mother later went to a mental institution. So from the time he was about 6 years old on, he reared himself. He was in foster homes and boys' homes until he was about 15. And then he went for a year and a half and lived with a half-sister in Boston. And he was in prison, and it was kind of rugged, really.
After his release from prison, Malcom X became a minister for the Nation of Islam. In his autobiography, Malcom X said, "No sane black man really wants integration. No sane white man really wants integration. The only solution is complete separation from the white man."
And one of the facts in your estimation is that Negro and white can never live together in America, can never
Well,
coexist.
evidently, the white man feels that the Negro can never live with him because it's the white man who is stopping integration. I'm not the one who is stopping Negroes from integrating with whites. I'm not the one who keeps Negroes from integrating white schools. And so don't put the burden of proof on me. It is the white man himself who is guilty and whose guilt proves that the Negro and the white man can't live side by side. Now, if I'm wrong in saying they can't, just prove that I'm wrong by doing it. Or just show me one place where it's done. If it can't be done in New York City, it won't be done anywhere in this country.
Malcom X became one of the best-known ministers in the Nation of Islam, but he was silenced for 90 days after the assassination of President Kennedy.
Malcolm, would I be correct in saying you're going to initiate a new movement in this country?
No, I don't think I'm equipped to initiate a new movement, but it's my intention to take the teachings of the Honorable El-Hajj Muhammad and make them work on a broader level.
How long has this been building up, this decision to make the change?
Well, I have been able to see for some time that it's that I do run into obstacles in trying to help him within the movement. So I want to help him just that bad, just that much. So it's my intention to try and do it now in the only way that I know how. And I think I can do it better without the restrictions that I would run into by being a part of the Muslim movement in this country. That is, the Muslim movement as it now exists.
How severe were the restrictions these past 90 days?
Oh, during the past 90 days, they were most severe. I've been completely silent.
Not able to talk is a real affliction for you, is that right?
Not only have I not been able to speak as a Muslim, I haven't even been able to speak as a man.
Actually, going back to that incident, you have told me on other occasions that you didn't actually say you were glad the president was dead. What did you say, Malcolm?
No, my subject that day was God's judgment of white America. And I showed the different incidents that had been building up, step by step, the fulfillment of prophecy, and that all of these things that were taking place were the result of some seeds that were badly sown, or some bad seeds that were sown. And the death of the president I referred to as the result of other things, a combination of things. And surprisingly, this is what the whole country was saying, that it was a climate of hate. So chickens coming home to roost means the same thing.
And this is what you said, chickens were coming home to roost.
Yes.
But at no time did you say you were glad the president...
No, I did say this, that it pleases me to see that the wisdom of the prophets, these ancient prophets, was so vast that they could foresee these things exactly as they were to come to pass thousands of years ago. This was part of my lecture that day, and they twisted it.
In April 1964, Malcolm made his first pilgrimage to Mecca.
Malcolm, on your trip abroad, you said you sensed a feeling of great brotherhood, and that conceivably you would be working toward integration in this country now. At least this is what you're reported to have said. Have you any comment on it?
I don't think that I ever mentioned anything about working toward integration. If I recall, I pointed out that while I was at Mecca making the pilgrimage, I spoke about the brotherhood that existed at all levels and among all people who were there on that Hajj, who had accepted the religion of Islam. I mean, perhaps it should drive some of the racism from this society as it has driven racism from the Muslim society.
You accept integration as a possible solution to the racial problem in this country?
No, people cloud the issue when they bring in the word integration. Integration can't even be defined. This is one of the reasons why it hasn't been realized.
When a letter was written back and it was published in the New York Times, I think Mr. Handler published it, a lot of people felt that he was becoming an integrationist, which was not true. He had gone to Mecca and he had merely written about what he saw, and people reported it as if, you know, he had gone there and planted these people there. So this was an observation on his part, and he was not in the least becoming an integrationist. His role was forever the fight for black freedom. He wanted to raise the level of the struggle from one of civil rights to one of human rights, and he felt that civil rights confined our struggle or our fight for freedom to the borders of the United States. And if we internationalized our struggle, if we got allies, and everyone realized the importance of getting allies, even this country in the Revolutionary War. They sent people all over, forming correspondence committee to explain their plight to the world and trying to get allies. And I think the French and the British and Spain joined this country in helping her win her independence. And just like they needed allies, you know, the black people needed allies, and I think this was one of the reasons for his trips.
Well, my purpose here is to remind the African heads of state that there are 22 million of us in America who are also of African descent, and to remind them also that we are the victims of America's colonialism or American imperialism, and that our problem is not an American problem, it's a human problem. It's not a Negro problem, it's a problem of humanity. It's not a problem of civil rights, but a problem of human rights.
And what do you hope for from this conference?
Well, we hope to bring pressure upon them, or rather we hope to impress upon them the importance of their bringing pressure and world opinion upon the United States to take some meaningful effort to solve our problem in America. We want them to help us get our problem before the United Nations and charge America with violating our human rights, in the same way that South Africa is charged with violating the human rights of our people in that area.
And what sort of reaction have you been getting from the African leaders?
Well, I've gotten a good reaction, a very sympathetic reaction, and an understanding reaction. Many of them have been misinformed by the American government into thinking that black people in America don't identify with Africa, and therefore they've restrained themselves from voicing their interest in our problem. But I've impressed upon them that our problem is their problem, as well as their problems are our problem.
Through continuous struggle, Malcolm X attempted to unify the civil rights movement with black nationalism. He speaks to students in Selma, Alabama, a few weeks before his death.
Then now, if the federal government
does not find it within its power and ability to investigate a criminal organization such as the Klan, then you and I are within our right to wire Secretary General Uthar of the United Nations and charge the federal government in this country behind Lyndon B. Johnson with being derelict in its duty to protect the human rights of 22 million black people in this country. And in their failure to protect our human rights, they are violating the United Nations Charter, and they are not qualified to continue to sit in that international body and talk about what human rights should be done in other countries on this earth. I have to say this, and I'll sit down. Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They sent some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" He was as sick as the master. When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes. They ate the worst food. And they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. I'm a field Negro. If I can't live in the house as a human being, I'm praying for a wind to come along. If the master won't treat me right and he's sick, as brothers, then I'm for a society of human beings that can brotherhood. So before I sit down, I want to thank you for listening to me. I hope I haven't put anybody on the spot. I'm not intending to try and stir you up and make you do something that you wouldn't have done anyway. I pray that God will bless you in everything that you do. I pray that you will grow intellectually so that you can understand the problems of the world and where you fit into in that world picture. And I pray that all the fear that has ever been in your heart will be taken out. And when you look at that man, if you know he's nothing but a coward, you won't fear him. If he wasn't a coward, he wouldn't gang up on you. He's a nigger. This is how they function. They function in mobs. That's a coward. They put on a sheet so you won't know who they are. That's a coward. No. The time will come when that sheet will be ripped off. If the federal government doesn't take it off, we'll take it off.
Although some of us may have disagreed with Malcom X, or we disagree with each other about him, let his going from us serve to bring us together.
we apologize in advance for some of the rough spots in the footage. Some of that film is at least 20 or 25 years old. Well, Buddy, I'd like to turn to you now and get some of your assessments respecting Malcolm X. Malcolm, of course, is remembered by most people for his views views that were attributed to him with respect to black nationalism and separatism. I'd like to look at some of the more controversial of these and perhaps ask you for your view. Firstly, I'd like to go to his speech where he talked about the ballot or bullets. I know a lot of people interpret this as meaning that Malcolm was advocating some form of violence. What was your interpretation of that speech?
Well, I think it was I think it was a very simple thing. I didn't have any problem understanding it. It seemed to me that what he was saying was liberty or death. Yeah, a ballot or bullet. You see, we have to set the time. We're talking. This is the Second World War is over. We're talking. We're into the 50s. We're into the middle 60s, and instead of things getting better for blacks in America, they're getting worse. Instead of racism rescinding, it's flourishing and it's spreading. Instead of understanding the message of Dr. Martin Luther King, which is love and peace and harmony, they were getting bombs, Bull Connors and his troops, and degradation. Malcolm, was coming into this scene, living it, experiencing it. Then, of course, he would be speaking, at the particular time as these things were unfolding.
Yes.
And I think his response to that was to tell blacks, look, you've got a choice here to continue to go on, to continue the next 100 years or more. You might just as well be dead. And I think this is what he meant. I don't think he meant go and shoot somebody, but it meant that they were just, this was all there was to life. There had to be a little bit more to it, and you're entitled to vote. This is America. Let's make it live up to his promise.
Do you think he might also have been talking about the tremendous potential in the black vote, where blacks perhaps could influence politics if they exercise their ballot?
I think he was wise enough to know that, and I think the whole thing, was political, highly political. And I think Malcolm realized that in many many areas of America, the black vote would be the balance of power, and in many cases they could elect their own black representatives. I think Malcolm knew that, and this is why, for instance, particularly in the southern states, in Georgia and etc., they were determined that black was not going to be able to vote for that particular reason. It was not only political, but there would be a good deal of corruption in politics in the states, and particularly the southern states at that time, and it was feasible to keep blacks outside of that very profitable situation that they had that throughout the years the Americans had developed. Not just racism. Racism was the tip of the iceberg, and I think that Malcolm recognized that, knew it. And of course, cheap labor, all these kinds of things are very, very profitable. And Malcolm realizing that as long as things were going to continue along that line, then blacks would always be on the bottom rung of the ladder. Skills and talents would be denied, and they would be constantly paying a terrible price for it. I think that it was very, very easy to take Malcolm's statement, of course, and link it to fiery rhetoric. This man is intending to overthrow the system and et cetera, and discredit it. But if you took it in its full context, because even the film we just saw here, they were not complete. What Malcolm was saying is that everybody is a man in America. Everybody is a human being. He had a great respect for God, and I think he saw human beings in that light. But he knew that through the political system there are going to have to be some unsettling things said, and I think it was courageous a person to do it. I don't think I would have the courage to do anything like that at that particular point in time.
Right, things were very rough. It's hard for some of us to imagine the kind of violence that was being foisted on the black community at that particular point in time. For somebody to stand up and take that kind of stand certainly required an awful lot of courage, as you suggest.
Certainly, you think, when you stop and realize that not only was the Klan very, very active, but being supported by your National Guard, by your police force, by the FBI, I'm certain you and I are no dummies. We realize that those folks knew exactly who the Klan members were. You just don't put on a hood, and come out of a small town, and you can't seem to find them. We knew they knew who they were, and they were being protected because they were proud of them. And it suited their purpose very well. And I think Malcolm knew that in making the kinds of statements, as fiery as they were, and again, many times misinterpreted, deliberately misinterpreted, that he was walking a tightrope, and that rope was going to lead to a sudden demise.
Well, now, Malcolm wasn't very fond of nonviolent action. This is the time, of course, where we had lots of set-ins and that kind of thing. When asked about his views on the nonviolent movement, he said, "To be nonviolent is to put on a dumb show, a moral pageant in the face of which the white man is blind and deaf." How do you feel about Malcolm's views on nonviolence?
Well, I think first of all, Hamid, we have to realize that when that statement was made, Malcolm had sat by and watched nonviolent, Dr. King's approach, for at least 3 years. And it was in the response to that nonviolent approach was again the whipping, the burning, the bombing, and the incarcerations, and etc. He then began to realize that nonviolence wasn't going to be complete, and that something else would have to complement that movement. And I think this is really what he was saying, and I really think that both Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King understood each other. The record shows that they had met on more than one occasion, on several occasions, and it wasn't unusual for them to have telephone conversations and etc. and to meet face to face. And these would have to be interpreted as methods of strategy, development of strategic positions, and defeating one another out on what their position was here and etc. And I think Dr. King realized that Malcolm was of tremendous value with his approach, and that something else would have to happen. We have to understand the mood of the southern states. Every Friday night in Georgia, it would be coon night. In Selma and Selma, Alabama, and those places, coon night meant that they went out on Friday nights and they found some black on his way home. They would jump out of their cars, point guns at them, make them tap dance, beat them up, and whatever. They were just victims of whatever these whites decided to do with them. And Malcolm's organization said, listen, put a gun in your back pocket, and when these people jump out of the cars and come after you, you point the gun at them. And then the newspapers say, well, my goodness, those blacks are violent. The term militant became violent when it was applied to blacks. There was no such thing as blacks' rights being violated, blacks having the right to defend themselves, having the right to be able to walk the streets with some form of dignity. But this is what Malcolm had to go through, and of course, how the news media would turn and change, one word, for instance, when you took Muslim and put black Muslim in front of it, it frightened people.
Yes.
It cast a shadow over it, and this is what the media had done by saying that black Muslim, this couldn't be an ordinary religious movement, but by saying black Muslim, fired people's imagination, frightened whites, and at the same time it encouraged whites to strike out, to strike back and to stop, to attempt to stop these movements before they were getting off the ground. And even though the doctrine might have been quite clear, we're talking about equality, we're talking about equal opportunity, and I think Malcolm in his description of separation, blacks and white cannot live together. Again, Malcolm was saying what the whites were telling him. It's not going to work, and he made that quite clear. He said, "Look, I'm not saying it. You're saying it, and if this is really what you want, then okay, let's do it."
Yeah.
let's call
yet
your
they were
bluff.
trying to make it appear as though he was the one who was
It
against
made it
integration.
appear as if Malcolm was anti-racist, anti-white, and etc. And I don't think that was the case.
You don't agree with those, and that would suggest that Malcolm was a racist.
Oh, I don't think so. I've read Malcolm's history, his background, and etc. And you could see there's a certain amount of elevation, and again, like I say, he spoke so often extemporaneously, responding, and spontaneous speeches, and that it was very, very easy to misinterpret. But actually, there was a psychological game Malcolm was playing here too. He was telling blacks that you are equal. Begin to move towards establishing and making use of your basic rights because they do belong to you. And then again, you have this choice. I don't think Malcolm. I think he realized that a complete separation of the races was impossible. And I think he showed that when he came back from Mecca. He said, "I never did say that you people ought, if that's what you want, and then you assist us in doing it, and we'll separate, we'll get away. Otherwise, stop playing these little games with us. There's going to have to be complete and total integration, and that means all service and etc. Or or you're going to have to stop misleading.
Well, Malcolm, we saw in the clip there, had made several visits to Africa and was very much involved in terms of trying to bring the struggle to a higher level. He kept emphasizing the need to move from an emphasis on civil rights to human rights. This is something that's just starting to emerge in 1983. Malcolm, surely you have to see him as being somewhat of a visionary in this respect.
Well, I would see that now, and of course we saw, I wasn't the most capable person in the world at that particular time, but even at that time I realized that in the area of civil rights versus human rights, that we would have to move from civil rights and move on to human rights. And I think Malcolm was courageous and farsighted and had a tremendous vision when he talked about universal. What he was talking about was universal human rights. And this is something that we have today. And I think all of America, and particularly its leaders, realize that it's a very valuable and most important area by which that America has to become involved in. The situations in San Salvador, the situations in South Africa, and etc. All down through Latin America, the violations of human rights. The national forum at least gives us an avenue by which some attempt can be made to address those problems and to prevent violations, just complete, utter disregard for the rights of the and dignity of a human being, be he
black or
whatever, Mexican, Spanish, or whatever the case may be, is going to be a very, very important thing for the world to develop. And I think Malcolm was way ahead. Certainly, when we look back at it now, that's exactly what he was saying.
But we're getting signs for raps, but before we go, Malcolm's death, who do you think was responsible?
Well, as far as I can read and what we've dug out, and an awful lot of things are kept out of the news media, we know that Malcolm's death was highly political. There isn't any doubt in my mind, and an awful lot of questions as to, first of all, there is no intelligent police force anywhere in the world could have made the blunders that the CIA and the American FBI investigations came up with. The answers were just simply covered over. There was an awful lot of, it was a blatant, deliberate attempt to prevent even a proper and thorough investigation of Malcolm's death.
So you think the government, I have to cut you off because we're getting signs, you think the government may have been involved?
Yeah, I say it was political.
Well, I want to thank you, Buddy. We want to thank you for watching. Unfortunately, our time is gone. Join us next week for Black Horizons.